In the winter of 1897, 4 hunters pushed deep into the Ozark backwoods to stop whatever was killing livestock near the current river. They expected a bear or a big cat. Instead, they found drag marks in the frost, strange hoofed prints beside claws, and a chilling call that echoed through the ridges like nothing living should make. Night came fast. By then, they were no longer sure they were the ones doing the hunting. So before we continue, please make sure to subscribe and let us know where you're watching from. Thanks. We walked into the hills at first light with 2 hounds on leads and a pack mule loaded with salt pork, cornmeal, and powder. Frost covered the dead leaves and cracked under our boots. The oaks stood bare and the cedars held the only color on the slopes. Tom Barrett led us with his old Springfield on his shoulder and a short axe at his belt. Jonah Pike kept the dog steady and watched the ground more than the trail. Cal Turner stayed beside the mule and tried not to show his nerves. I carried a Henry and a coil of rope. We had come to the current river country to find what had been killing calves behind the Choate place and a sow behind the Linder's barn. Folks in town said it was a big cat. Others said it was a bear. One man at the mill said a thing with horns watched his fire from the ridge and he would not go out after dark anymore. No one laughed at him. Winter was close. Meat mattered. So did the fear that kept men inside their doors. We followed an old trace that crossed small draws and ran along the high side of a hollow. The ground dropped into sinkholes and rose again without warning. Thin water moved in the creek, and ice clung to the edges where the flow slowed. A hawk circled once and drifted east. Smoke from the last farms fell behind us by mid-morning. The dogs eased with the climb. Jonah touched the ground where the trace widened and crouched. He pointed to flattened leaves and hair caught on a stump. It was dark and rough, not deer, not hog. It clung to the bark as if scraped by a heavy body passing too close. He didn't say anything at first. He set the hair in his palm and looked at it until Tom asked for it. Tom rolled it between his fingers and smelled it. He frowned and gave it back. We went on. Near noon, we found the first sign that meant blood. A goat lay half hidden under brush 100 yards off the trace. Something had dragged it from a yard or a pen, judging by the rope still looped around a broken piece of cedar stake. The head was torn across the neck. The ribs showed where the hide was peeled back, clean and careful. There were claw marks on the shoulders and deep punctures through the spine. Jonah led the hounds wide and kept them quiet with a hand on their collars. Their bodies shook, but they didn't bark. He squinted at the ground about 20 paces off and motioned us over. The prints were sunk into the softest patches between stones. They were wide and heavy, more cat than bear in the shape of them, with claws that hit the dirt harder than a cat should. The stride was long. Tom took off his hat and ran his thumb along the edge of one print to measure it. He put the hat back on without a word. We made camp on a bench above the creek where the wind broke against a wall of limestone. We gathered dead hickory and oak and lit a small fire no higher than a man's knee. The mule cropped what grass it could find and stood quiet. The dogs curled up near the heat and kept their noses in their paws. Cal cut bacon into the skillet and turned it with a branch. He asked, too light in his voice, whether we thought it was a bear. No one answered. After we ate, Tom pulled a small notebook from his coat and looked over a hand-drawn map of the hollows and ridges. He traced a line toward a place he marked as Duck Blind Springs. Folks had told him in town that sounds carried from that side at night for 2 weeks running. He closed the book and tucked it away. I cleaned my rifle and checked the lever by feel. When the sun went down, the cold came in fast and our breath hung in front of us. The woods did not make much noise. A small owl called once and went quiet. We heard the first cry when the moon cleared the ridge. It started low, moved high, and broke into a rough, short laugh near the end, then turned into a long trumpet that swelled and fell. The dogs stood and leaned against the leads with their legs stiff. Jonah kept them down with both hands and a hushed word. The cry came again, closer, and the sound bounced against the stone until I could not tell which way it traveled. It did not match any cat, wolf, or elk I had heard in these hills. It held notes from each without sitting in any one of them. I felt the hair on my arm stand up under my shirt. Cal looked at Tom. Tom's face did not change. He fed 2 more small sticks to the flames and said we would keep the fire low. No one slept much. The cry came 2 more times toward morning and then stopped. At first light, frost silvered the mule's back. We stamped our feet and set out toward the springs. The ground there broke into shelves of rock with thin soil between them. Cedar roots gripped the edges. We moved single file along a game path. Jonah bent and lifted a hard pellet with hair pressed through it. He broke it with a stick and showed us the bits of bone inside, not from deer. He dropped it and wiped his fingers on the dirt. A stink hung in a small basin ahead, heavy and sour. It grew stronger as we climbed. A cedar stood scarred where something had raked high with claws. The mark sat above my head by a full span. Jonah's jaw worked, and he said a bear could do that if it stood. Tom nodded, but he did not look convinced. The dogs started a low whine that seemed to come from their chest more than their throat. Their tails were tucked hard. Before midday, we found a second kill. This one was fresh. Steam still rose from the torn belly of a yearling deer. The legs were snapped and flung apart. The head was crushed. The prints around it showed a rough circle of movement, as if the animal had trod in place before dragging the deer. I counted 3 places where hooves had nicked stone near the prints. Not deer hooves. These were short, sharp marks, 2 to a step, set at the front of the main pad. Tom crouched and held his hand over one, not touching it, as if he did not want to disturb what it told him. He stood and said we would not track straight on a fresh kill. We would swing wide, cross the ridge, and come down with the wind in our face. Jonah nodded and led the dogs away. Cal kept looking at the broken head of the deer and then at the shadows between the cedars. We crested the ridge on hands and knees in places and slid on the loose rock in others. The wind hit our faces from the north and tasted clean. My legs burned. On the far side, the land fell into a long hollow choked with scrub oak and glades of grass. The spring sat near the bottom under a line of rock where water seeped out. A thin mist hung over the seeps. The dogs pulled harder now, but it wasn't the eager pull of a chase. It felt strained. Jonah's arms tightened and sweat showed on his neck despite the cold. He looked back once, and I saw him weigh the choice to let them go. He kept them close. We angled down until the smell hit us again, stronger than before. It sat in the hollow like a weight. The hair on the dog's back stood up, and they both stopped. Their bodies trembled, and they set their legs in the dirt. They would not move forward. Tom raised his hand. We halted under a bluff where we could see the flat below. The spring water cut through the grass and ran clear over stones. On the far side, under a low cedar, something dark lay in the grass. It was not a kill. It was a bed. The grass was pressed down in an oval. Coarse dark hair lay scattered across it. The ground bore prints that showed repeated use. The dirt was churned deep, and the hoof marks sat again just ahead of the main pads. The bed faced uphill toward the route we had taken. Tom swallowed and set the rifle to his shoulder without bringing it to his cheek. He held it there, thinking. He said we would not go across the flat. We would back out and climb to the next ridge to keep sight lines. Cal breathed fast through his nose and nodded too many times. We took 3 steps back when a stone rolled above us. It clicked down the slope and broke in 2 on a larger rock. Every head turned uphill. Nothing moved. The hill held still. I checked the chamber by touch. The mule shifted behind us and bumped my shoulder with the pack frame. I heard Jonah's whisper telling the dogs to lie down. They obeyed, but they did not blink, and their bodies shook. Another small rock came loose on the slope, not far above where the game path angled down. It did not fall by accident. It bounced, stopped, and then skittered again, as if nudged. Tom raised his hand higher, and we froze. The wind kept to our faces. The stink deepened until I tasted it. A shadow broke from a clump of brush and moved across the slope in 3 slow steps. It was broad across the shoulders and hung close to the ground at the front, then lifted at the back. Horns rose from the skull in 2 tight curves. It turned its head, and red eyes caught the light without blinking. The shape held still for a moment and then slipped behind a cedar trunk. No sound came from it. The only sound was the water at the springs and our own breath. Tom lowered his hand and spoke without moving his mouth much. We would not fire across that distance and hit clean through brush. We would wait, pull back in a straight line to the ridge behind us, and circle east to open ground. His voice stayed calm. He looked at each of us to make sure we heard. We nodded. We eased our feet, one at a time, on the loose ground. The dogs did not step. Jonah had to lift them, front legs dangling, and set them down again to move them. We reached the angle of the bluff and slipped behind it one by one. When we cleared the line of sight, the dogs barked twice without warning. The sound tore through the hollow and jumped off the stone. Something answered from the slope with that same rising howl, broken by a rough burst and ending in a long, full call that shook the leaves on the branches above us. My hands went cold even through my gloves. Tom said one word. Go. We broke from the bluff at a steady walk and climbed for the ridge behind us. Tom kept us in a tight line and checked our spacing with quick looks over his shoulder. The ground was loose under the leaf litter, and I placed each step with care. The dogs pulled and then balked, torn between the urge to run and the urge to freeze. Jonah handled them with short, practiced lifts. Cal dragged the mule's lead and breathed through his mouth. He whispered that we should head south and keep the creek between us and the slope. Tom said no. We would reach the ridge, hold the height, and keep the wind in our faces. His tone left no room for debate. I felt the urge to run but kept it down. Moving fast on broken ground would end in a fall or a turned ankle. I wanted solid footing and a clear view more than speed. Halfway up, we heard a short clatter of stone off to our right above the hollow we had crossed earlier. It came in 2 bursts with a pause between them, not a slide but a shove, like a boot scraping, then another. Cal stopped. Tom waved him on without words. The dogs took the cue and moved again. I kept my eyes high, searching for movement between the trunks. A stand of young cedars hid the slope above the springs. Nothing broke from it. Nothing showed. When we reached the crest, the wind hit us colder and pushed the stink away. I felt my head clear. Tom pointed east to a long back of rock that ran into a glade. He said we would cross to that spine and then drop to open ground. The glade would keep our line of sight clean. We started across the ridge top. The trees thinned. Patches of grass grew between flat stones. The glade opened ahead with low scrub and a burned circle where someone had once made charcoal. A ring of stones still stood around the blackened spot. Tom raised a fist and we halted. On the near edge of the ring, fresh scratches cut the lichen on 3 stones. Each mark had a pair set close together, point to point, and a third nick between them, deeper than the rest. Jonah crouched and touched one with a fingertip. He said nothing. I studied the pattern and thought of the prints with the extra marks set ahead of the main pads. The distance between scratches matched the width of those prints. It was not a guess. Cal asked where the nearest farm lay from here. Tom said the Choate place sat to the north by 2 ridges. The marks faced that way. He stared at them longer than he needed to. We moved through the glade. The dogs pulled hard toward the far side, then threw their weight backward at the same instant and dropped to their bellies. Their heads turned, not toward the springs now, but up the ridge behind us. Jonah held them tight, then slowly let the leads run long enough for them to stand. They did not bark. They watched the same patch of brush near a boulder and waited. I trained my rifle at the gap between 2 trunks and held still. Tom's voice came low. He said we would not stand in the open. We would take the high rock, set a small fire for smoke, and wait until mid-afternoon to make a decision about camp. Cal said he would not sleep near here. Tom did not answer. He pointed to the rock. We went. From the top of the spine, the country fell away in steps. The springs lay behind us now. To the east, the land opened into scattered oak and grass. A narrow path cut the near slope where game moved toward water. The wind kept steady. The stink eased until it sat at the edge of smell. I could think again without fighting my own breath. Tom had us set a small flame behind a break in the stone, not for warmth, but to test whether smoke would rise straight or shift with a turn in the air. It rose straight. Good. We ate cold biscuit and a slice of bacon each. The mule stood with its ears forward and did not touch the grass. Jonah poured a little water into a tin for the dogs. They lapped and then lifted their heads to sniff. They were not hungry. That told me enough. Tom laid out a plan. We would hold the high ground until the sun slid toward the ridge. If the thing stayed on our side, we would move east to a camp on the open slope and sit through the night with a clear field of fire. If it dropped behind us and crossed back to the springs, we would withdraw to the creek and follow it south until full dark, then cut a lean-to and take turns on watch. He said he did not intend to chase it into its bed. He wanted it to move where it had to show itself. Jonah agreed. Cal took it in and nodded. He tried to sound steady and almost did. For an hour, the woods held quiet. A jay called once from low in the oak to our left. A squirrel ran across a log and vanished into a hole. I worked oil into a stiff patch on my lever with a cloth and watched the path below. Tom checked his sights against the bark of a dead snag at 50 paces and again at 100. Jonah listened with his eyes half closed, head tilted the way men do when they sort near from far. The dogs rested with chests against the stone, mouths closed, ears turned. The mule cropped 3 mouthfuls of grass and then stood with its head high. The sound came from the north ridge, not from the springs. It wasn't the cry. It was a low huff and a short stamp, followed by a scrape across stone. It repeated in a slow pattern. I counted the spaces between them and felt no rhythm I knew. Not deer, not hog. Tom motioned for attention and pointed to a stand of blackjack oak below the ridge crest where the ground folded into a shallow pocket. If it came through there, it would show itself against lighter grass. He set the muzzle of his rifle across the stone and settled his shoulder. He did not hurry. I joined him at a different angle to give us a crossfire. Jonah brought the dogs behind us and tied their leads to a cedar root, then took his place with a shotgun loaded with buck. Cal took the mule's lead and crouched, keeping it out of our line. We waited. Breath made small clouds in the cold air when the sun passed behind a thin band of cloud. The scrape came again, farther along the ridge, as if it had moved 10 paces while we stood still. I thought it might be testing our position, reading our placement the way a man does before stepping into a clearing. That thought sat hard in me. Tom's lips tightened. He felt it too. He whispered that we would not call or whistle. We would not try to draw it. We would let it decide its avenue and then hold our ground. A stone rolled then, small at first and then larger, knocking other stones loose until a clack rang across the hollow. It came from the pocket, just where Tom had guessed. A shadow slipped between the blackjack trunks. It moved with the front low and the back high. I saw the line of the head and the curve of the horns for a heartbeat. The eyes caught the daylight and held it. My trigger went to the wall without a break. Tom fired first. The crack hit hard and bounced. My shot followed. Jonah's buck echoed after, and bark flew from a trunk. The shadow vanished. A breath later, the cry rose from the ridge behind us and rolled down the slope, not from the pocket we had fired into. The dog slammed against the root and barked in panic. The mule reared and swung. Cal lost his grip and dove for the lead before it took off. He caught it and wrapped the rope around his wrist. The mule danced but did not bolt. I swung my rifle to the rear ridge and searched the trees. Nothing showed. Tom swore under his breath. He said it had not been where we fired. Something had moved in the pocket, but the voice came from behind us. He did not say we had been drawn, but the meaning hung in his face. He told Jonah to hold the dogs and me to cover the path up our own ridge. He told Cal to steady the mule and keep low. He reloaded with slow, precise motions. He kept looking for a second shape. I did the same. I hated the thought of two, but I knew we had to consider it now. The woods answered with silence. I waited for the next move. My hands felt steady again. Fear had settled into something useful. It sharpened my focus. I traced likely routes in my head, measured the distance from stump to stump, and picked places where a body could disappear if it decided to rush. I planned where I would aim if it showed only a shoulder or a hip. I set my foot against a root to anchor my stance. Tom nodded once, seeing the same. The next move did not come from the ridge. It came from under us. A breath of air rose through a crack in the rock and hit our faces with the stink. I had not noticed the fissure in the stone, narrow and dark, no wider than a boot in most places. It ran under the high point of the spine and angled downslope into brush. The cry that had come from behind had masked the sound below our feet. I crouched and looked down the line of the crack. A drop of dark liquid clung to the edge. It was not water. Jonah saw it and pulled one dog close. The dog's lips lifted in a sound I had never heard from him. Tom shifted 3 steps to the left and covered the lowest opening of the fissure where the rock broke apart. A small stone rattled inside the crack and settled. Then came a short, wet exhale. Not a cough, not a sneeze. A deliberate release of breath. The red points showed in the dark for an instant and went black again. Tom's rifle was already up. He did not fire. He waited for a clear line. I brought my barrel down and found an angle that showed the edge of a cheek and a part of a horn. I could not put a round where it would do the work we needed. Jonah raised his shotgun and lowered it again. Buck would spray stone and blind us. We held. The breath came again, closer to the lower break, and the crack widened as the rock shifted under pressure. I felt the change through my boots. Whatever moved below had the strength to flex the stone. It wanted the low exit. Tom adjusted half a pace and set his front sight at the hole. He said, very soft, that when it showed a shoulder, he would take it, and I would follow a hand width behind into the same place. If it pushed through, Jonah would fire the buck at chest height. Cal was to pull the mule behind the cedar and keep his head down. The plan settled over us in a clean line. The horn tip entered the opening, then part of the brow, and an eye flared red in the gloom. Flesh and bone followed. Tom's shot hit with a flat thud. My shot touched a span behind his. The thing withdrew with speed that did not match its size. Stones scraped. A low tone filled the fissure and ran along it like air in a pipe. I smelled hot metal from Tom's barrel and worked the lever again. Jonah held fire. He did not waste his shot. Blood ran from the lower edge of the opening and pattered on the leaves. It was dark and thick. It did not steam. We listened. The sound inside the rock moved away in short bursts, then paused. Another burst ran farther downslope, then silence. The stink eased a little. Tom kept his rifle on the hole for a full minute by the sun. Only when he was sure did he turn his head and say, we would not hold this perch any longer. We had hurt it, or angered it, or both. He chose open ground and a clear night fire where we could watch every approach. He told us to gather our gear in silence. I agreed with his choice. The rock had become a trap for us as much as for it. We moved off the spine and into the oaks, staying low, keeping the ridge to our backs until we could break east. The dogs walked without a sound now. Their fear had turned into something close to discipline. Cal's face had no color in it. He kept his eyes on the ground and did not speak. I felt a tightness in my chest, but also a clean purpose. We knew more than we had that morning. It moved under stone. It could be in 2 places at once if there were 2. It watched our positions and tested us. It bled. That last fact carried weight. It was not a ghost story. It was a body that could be hurt. That did not lessen the danger. It only gave us one clear path. Hold ground where sight lines were long and force it to show itself or leave us be. We kept moving until the trees thinned into a long slope of grass and scattered rock. The sun leaned west but still held enough light to see the folds of land for a good distance. Tom picked a spot near a group of waist-high stones that curved into a half circle facing uphill. It gave some cover without blocking our view. He told us to unpack, set the mule with its back to the stone, and tie the dogs where they could move but not bolt. If night came before we were ready, we would pay for it. Jonah cleared a flat area for the fire. He gathered dry grass, then thicker branches, all silent and quick. Cal set the bedrolls behind the stones and checked the mule's packs twice, making sure none of the tins or tools made noise. I laid out our ammunition on a cloth where our hands could reach it without fumbling. The wind pushed from the north and carried no scent I could place. The weight in the air that had followed us since the springs eased a little here. The animals held steadier. The dogs lay with their heads up, not trembling. I thought maybe the creature did not like open slopes. Maybe that was why it lived in hollows and cracks. That thought helped, but only for a few seconds. Tom pointed out our firing arcs. He would take the center, covering the main rise. I would hold the right side where the grass dipped into a shallow run. Jonah would take the left near the edge of a thin grove of young oaks. Cal would stay against the stones with the mule and reload for whoever needed it. No one argued. The plan felt solid. The only flaw was the unknown. How many of them were there? How close had we come to being encircled without knowing? We set the fire once the sun touched the ridge. Only a handful of sticks, enough for smoke and a bit of heat. The light spread across the grass and gave every rock a clear line. The sky shifted from blue to a washed-out gray. Birds settled somewhere far off. The hills seemed to hold their breath. Tom said we should talk, low and steady, so we didn't jump at every noise. He asked Jonah what he thought of the prints. Jonah said they weren't any cat he knew, and a bear couldn't move the way it did. Then he said something that stuck with me. He had tracked animals all his life. He said every animal had a rhythm. Deer flicked their ears and stepped twice before setting their weight. Cats paused with the back foot hanging for a heartbeat. Bears swayed and tested the ground with their nose. This thing's rhythm was wrong. It stopped too still and moved too sudden. It watched before stepping. That meant thought. It wasn't running from hunger. It was planning. Cal rubbed his hands together and stared at the fire. He asked again why we didn't just go back down to the farms and warn folks. Tom said what followed us might follow them if we ran for the valley. Better to finish the job here than wait for a dead calf to become a dead child. Cal shut his mouth and nodded. I saw fear in his eyes, but also something else. Shame, maybe. He didn't want to be the one who failed his neighbors. Darkness crept up from the creek bottoms first. The open slope stayed visible a while longer, holding the last light. The fire crackled once, too loud in the quiet. I checked the chamber again. Jonah steadied his shotgun across his knee. Tom didn't blink much. He watched the rise, slow breaths, hands loose. The first sound came from behind us. A low scrape across stone, not far. We turned, rifles up, but saw only silhouettes of cedar trunks. The scrape came again, farther to the right. Jonah swore under his breath. Tom shifted his weight, thinking. The thing had circled upslope. It was trying to find a blind spot. The dogs rose and stared uphill. No growl, just a fixed, hard stare. Then the smell came through the wind, faint but clear enough to turn the mule's head sharply. It brayed once before Jonah's hand clamped over its muzzle. The cry that followed cut through the dark from the left, down near the dip of the run I watched. It echoed long, spilling into the hollow. My heart jumped into my throat. The cry was not alone. A second call answered from farther up the ridge. 2. We had feared it. Now we knew. Tom didn't speak. He didn't need to. We tightened the line. The fire between us and the stones cast shadows long across the ground. I shifted to keep the glare out of my sights. My fingers settled against cold metal, ready. A shape moved by the boulders above us, broad low in front. The red eyes burned in the dark. It stepped slow, then paused, watching. I raised my rifle but waited for Tom. He breathed once, then fired. The muzzle flash lit the slope. The shape jerked, not in pain, but in anger. It dropped behind a rock. Jonah fired buckshot where it had stood. Stone chips flew. The second one came fast from the run. It bounded low, covering ground with frightening speed. I fired and hit its flank. It skidded sideways and crashed into a stump but didn't fall long. It came up with its head down and horns catching the light. Cal shouted. The mule snapped the rope and kicked back, nearly trampling him. Jonah swung his barrels to the one charging. He waited until it cleared the brush and fired into its shoulder. The blast rolled up the ridge. The thing let out a choking roar and twisted away, blood spraying dark across the grass. It fled uphill, dragging a leg. Tom yelled to keep eyes on the first one. He fired another round toward the rock where it hid. A growl rumbled from the shadows. Then the rock shifted. It shoved the stone aside and stepped into view. The horns curled tight against its skull. The fur was thick, dark, matted with dirt and hair from old kills. Its mouth hung open, teeth long and uneven. It dragged one paw as if Tom's first shot had struck bone. Jonah reloaded, hands moving fast. I aimed for the blinking eye. Before I squeezed, it moved with terrible speed. It charged straight into us, head low. Tom's rifle barked again. The shot hit the side of its neck. It stumbled but didn't stop. I fired and missed clean. The ground shook with each stride. Jonah dropped his shotgun and drew the knife on his belt. He stood over the dogs, ready to give them a chance to escape if it breached our line. Cal grabbed a burning branch and swung it wide, trying to blind it or drive it off. Tom stepped forward and took the brunt. The creature slammed into him. They both fell hard. His rifle flew from his grip. The beast snapped its jaws inches from his face, its breath wet and hot. Tom shoved his forearm into its throat and reached for the knife at his belt. He couldn't find it. Without thinking, I ran in and jammed the barrel of my rifle against its ribs. I fired point blank. The sound tore the night apart. The beast lurched and wheezed, then thrashed in a wild burst of strength. I rolled away before it crushed me. Jonah was on it then, his knife going deep into the back of its neck. Cal pushed the burning branch against its snout. The creature howled, a short grinding sound, and went still. Silence hit so fast it felt wrong. We breathed hard. Tom pushed the body off and sat up slowly. His coat was torn, teeth marks deep in the fabric but not his arm. He looked at the dead thing with a blank expression. He spat once in the dirt. I scanned the ridge for the second one, wounded but alive. Nothing moved, no cry, no scrape, just stillness. Jonah wiped blood from his knife. Cal sat down and held his shaking hands close to the fire. The mule stood farther down the slope, breathing hard but alive. The dogs finally barked, not from fear, but from anger. Tom stood and checked his ribs with a wince. He said we weren't done until we knew the other one was gone. We would track it at first light and finish the job. Until then, we would guard the fire and hold the high ground. Tonight, he said, we stay alive. I nodded and kept watching the ridge, waiting for movement in the dark that didn't come. We stayed in a tight circle around the fire, each of us facing a different direction. The dead one lay near the stones. Its body was longer than a black bear's but moved like a cat before we brought it down. The horns curved smooth and sharp. Its paws ended in claws that had chipped stone. Its fur was coarse and smelled of rot. Jonah scraped some dirt over its face so the eyes wouldn't catch the firelight. Cal avoided looking at it altogether. The dogs sat pressed against each other, lifting their heads every few breaths to scan the ridge. The mule stayed down the slope, turning to watch us and then the trees, unsure which side was safer. The fire kept low. We fed it only thin sticks so it would give light but not a high blaze. Shadows danced over the grass. I checked my rifle again. My hands still shook from the charge. Tom rolled his shoulder and tested his grip strength. He winced but said it was only bruising. He picked up his knife and cleaned the blade slow, then set it beside him where he could reach it without searching. The night felt stretched thin. Each small sound made us stiffen. A shift of leaves, a branch settling, the low murmur of the creek somewhere below. I thought of home, of my sister's lamp glowing in the window when I walked back late from the fields. I pushed the thought aside. Daydreaming would get me killed here. Tom spoke in a quiet voice, almost more like thinking aloud. He said there had to be a reason these things hunted so close to the farms. They weren't starving. The one we killed was strong, well-fed, too bold for its own good. Jonah said it wasn't boldness, it was territory. They didn't want us here. Cal whispered that maybe we were on their trail by accident, that we cut through a place they guarded. Tom said if that were true, they'd been near people for months and weren't hiding it anymore. He picked up the beast's front paw, studying the shape of it, hoof-like tips at the front, pads behind, something wrong in the way it grew, as if two forms pressed together. He looked up the ridge again, jaw set tight. We took turns on watch through the dark. I went second. Tom stayed awake through all of it, refusing rest, listening to the wind. On my watch, the air was heavy with the smell of damp leaves and blood. The moon rose and threw pale light over the ridge. I scanned every stump, every clump of grass, expecting red eyes to appear. My breath came slow and long, trying not to fog my vision. Halfway through my shift, a short cry echoed distant in the valley. Not the howl. A short call. A pained one. The second creature. Jonah rose from his blanket before I even turned to wake him. He said it was hurt worse than he thought. It moved downhill. I swallowed, unsure if that made me feel safer or more exposed. Hunting wounded animals often ended badly. They didn't think the way healthy ones did. When dawn finally pushed into the hollow, the fire was nothing but ash and two glowing coals. Frost crusted the grass. Our breath looked like smoke. The dead creature's blood had dried black. The dogs ate a small share of food and drank. The mule refused grain but took a few mouthfuls of stiff grass. Its ears flicked at every hilltop. Tom said we would not leave an injured monster roaming these slopes. He told Jonah to check the body again while we packed gear. I folded blankets and rolled my bed tight. Cal rewrapped the load on the mule and tied knots with shaking fingers. He tried to hide it, but his hands had no strength left. The fight had drained him more than he wanted to admit. Jonah called us over. He had found something lodged near the shoulder wound, a broken piece of antler or horn, brittle and strange, not natural. It had grown inward, then snapped. The beast had been carrying injury long before we saw it. Tom turned the shard in his fingers. It was light but dense, like bone compressed too much. He pocketed it. We followed the blood trail of the wounded one. Droplets at first, then thicker smears where it brushed rocks or trees. The path led north, toward a narrow cut in the ridge. The sun climbed slow, fighting through a layer of thin clouds. The woods brightened but did not warm. We moved in silence, weapons ready. The dogs stayed close now, not pulling ahead. Their ears turned constantly. Cal walked near Jonah, glancing at every fresh mark with dread. I watched the open slopes behind us as much as the trail in front. The blood grew heavier just below the cut. The smell returned, strong and sour. I covered my mouth with my sleeve. Tom raised his fist for us to stop. He crouched and studied the prints. They staggered. The creature had dragged its bad leg in long arcs through the leaf litter. It was slowing. Jonah whispered that the cut ahead opened into a sinkhole. He knew this ridge. He had hunted deer here years ago. There was a drop where the land fell into a bowl of stone and dirt washed down from storms. Only one way in, only one way out. A cornered animal would choose that place if it knew the ground. Tom nodded once. We would go slow. We reached the edge of the sinkhole and looked down. The basin held tangled brush and a cluster of thick cedars growing in crushed rock. But what struck me first was the smell. Fresh, strong, stronger than anywhere else. The air seemed heavy with it. Tom motioned for Jonah to take the left and circle the rim while I moved right. Cal stayed behind with the mule and dogs. He hated it, but he knew leaving them alone was worse. The mule would panic if left unattended. The dogs might bolt after any noise. He gripped his rifle even though his hands barely kept it steady. Jonah and I crept along opposite sides of the bowl. The ground was loose. Each step had to be set deliberate. I kept my head low and used the trunks as cover. I scanned the bottom for movement. Nothing at first. Then I saw a dark shape behind the largest cedar. It lay half covered by fallen branches. A leg twitched. I raised my rifle and steadied the sight. The creature's flank rose and fell fast. Its breaths came sharp and uneven. It was dying. Tom joined me silently, sight aligning with mine. He didn't fire yet. He checked Jonah's angle. He waited for certainty. He always waited for certainty. The creature lifted its head. Its eyes burned even in daylight. It tried to stand but slipped back down. A low growl rattled from its throat. It dug claws into the dirt and pulled itself forward inch by inch, refusing to stop. Tom said, "Now." 2 shots cracked as one. The body jerked once and went still. The sound died quick in the cold air. Jonah slid down first. He prodded it with the shotgun barrel, then nodded. Dead, fully dead this time. Tom knelt beside it. He placed a hand on its ribs and watched until the last breath left. There was no satisfaction in his face, only caution, making sure the job was finished. He told Jonah to bring the dogs so they could smell it, learn the scent for their own safety if anything like it ever came again. Cal climbed down with the mule behind him. He stood over the dead beast a long time. He didn't speak. The fear in his eyes changed to something harder. Anger. Resentment at what the thing had made him feel in the night. We stood around the creature as the wind swept down into the bowl. I felt the cold reach deeper than before, not from weather, but from the knowledge that these things had lived here long enough to know the ground better than we did. They had nests, trails under stone, maybe more we hadn't seen. Jonah pointed to a tangle of bone near the cedar. Old kills, not deer, not goat, larger. A half-buried boot lay beside them, cracked leather and rusted nails. No bones inside it, just the boot. Tom stared at it, jaw tight. He said we would burn the sinkhole, everything in it, not haul trophies, not drag a carcass to town for gossip. Fire would clean the ground. Folks would hear the truth only if they needed to. We gathered fallen branches, dry brush, and splintered cedar limbs. Jonah checked the wind. Tom struck the match. The flames caught slow at first, then roared as the fat cedar wood took. Smoke rolled up the ridge. Sparks climbed into bare branches. The smell of burning fur filled the air, but soon faded under the stronger scent of cedar pitch. We backed away as the fire spread through the brush. The bowl lit bright, flames climbing the trunks. I watched the shape of the beast disappear under heat and smoke. No trace left that anyone could find once winter storms washed through. Tom turned to us. He said we would head back by a different route and warn Choate and Linder privately. They could move their herds without stirring fear in town. If folks wanted to laugh, let them. Better laughter than panic. As we climbed out of the sinkhole, the fire crackled below. The smoke thinned as the wind carried it east. We walked in silence for a long stretch, each step easing the weight from our shoulders bit by bit. There was no triumph in our pace, only relief and exhaustion. I kept looking back, making sure nothing followed. We were alive. Both of them were dead. The ridge stood quiet again.